In this video, we're going to discuss the name and address programming problem from your textbook, and we'll work out a solution to the problem. The assignment tells you to write a GUI program that when it initially runs, it displays a window that looks something like this. Basically, it's initially just going to be pretty much an empty window except for these two buttons. We have a button that says Show Info, and then we have another button that says Quit. And when the user clicks the Show Info button, the program will display your name and address as shown here in this sketch on the right. So you click the Show Info button and the information is displayed on the window. And obviously when you click the Quit button, the program will end. Well, let's talk for a moment about the way we're going to lay out the graphical components in the user interface. First, we'll start with the main window, and then within the main window we will add two frames. We'll have one frame here that occupies the top part of the window, and then we'll have a second frame that occupies the lower part of the window. And we're going to use these frames for organizational purposes. In the top frame, we're going to create three label widgets, one to hold the name, one to hold the street, and one to hold the city, state, and zip. And then in this bottommost frame, we're going to put the two button widgets in it. And the primary reason that we're using these two separate frames is so that we can get the desired layout. We want these labels to be stacked one on top of the other. We want the name to be displayed here at the top, and then just under that the street, and then under that the city, state, and zip. But the buttons, we want them to appear horizontally, side by side. So when we add the labels to their frame, we'll simply use the default positioning where the widgets are positioned one on top of each other. But then when we add the buttons to this frame, we will position the Show Info button to the left and the Quit button to the right. We'll pass the proper arguments to the pack methods for those widgets. Now let's talk for a moment about the way the application is going to work. When the window is initially displayed, these labels are going to exist here in the window, but they're going to be blank. We're not going to have any data displayed in them. And you'll recall from reading in this chapter that you can associate a string var object with a label, and then you can use that string var object to display output in the label. And that's the approach that we're going to take. These labels will initially be empty, but they will be associated with a string var object that we can use to display data in the labels when the user clicks the Show Info button. So we're going to have a callback function that's associated with the Show Info button. When the user clicks that button, the callback function will use the string var objects to display the name, the street, and the city, state, and zip. Okay, well that's pretty much the way that the application is going to be designed. Now let's switch over to the Python editor and look at the code. In this program, just as we've done with all of the programs in this chapter, we have a class that will create the graphical user interface when we instantiate the class, and it's the class's init method that does all the setup work. So in the init method, we create the root object. That's an instance of tkinter.tk. It's the main window. And then in these three statements, we're creating three string var objects. The first one we're calling name value, and the second one we're calling street value, and the third one we're calling CSZ value. CSZ, that we're just using that to mean city, state, zip. So these string var objects are going to display the name, the street, and the city, state, zip in some label widgets that you'll see in just a moment. Next, we're going to create the two frames. We're going to create a frame named info frame. That one's going to hold the label widgets. And then we're going to have another frame called button frame that's going to hold the button widgets. And you can see that we've placed those inside the main window. So at this point we have our string var objects and we have our frames. Next we're going to create the labels. So the first one we're calling name label. Obviously this one's going to display the person's name. And you can see here that we're putting it in the info frame. And you can also see here where we are associating it with the name value string var object that was created earlier. Next we create a label called street label. This is going to display the person's street address. We put it in the info frame and we associate it with the street value string var object that was created previously. And then third, we are creating a label that we're calling CSZ label, city, state, zip. We're putting it in the info frame and we are associating it with the CSZ value string var object that was created previously. Okay, so now we have our label widgets created. In these three statements, we are simply calling those label widgets pack methods, and we're just going to use the default positioning because we want them to appear stacked one on top of the other. Next, we're going to create the button widgets. So first, we're going to create one called show info button, and you can see that we're putting it inside the button frame. The text on the face of the button is show info, and here we're specifying a callback function, self.show. Now we'll look at that method in just a moment, but whenever the show info button is clicked, the program will call the show method, which is here in this same class. Next we're going to create the quit button, and you can see that we've also put it in the button frame. The text that is displayed is the word quit, and here we are setting this button up so that it will destroy the window when the user clicks it, and that will end the program. Next we are going to call those button objects pack methods, and for the info button we're specifying side equal left. That will position it to the left side of the frame, and for the quit button we're specifying side equal right. That will position it to the right side of the frame. Then we are going to pack the frames. So that's what we do in these two statements, and then we call the tcounter.main loop function to start the main loop. Okay, so that's the init method. Now the next method in our class is the show method. This is the callback function for the show info button, and you can see here that we are manipulating the string var objects in this method. So the first thing that we do is that we call the name value objects set method, and we are passing a string as an argument to the set method. So this string will be displayed in the label widget that is associated with this string var object. We do the same thing with the street value object. We call its set method, passing this string as an argument. So this value will be displayed in the label widget that is associated with this string var object. And then last we call the CSZ value objects set method, passing this string as an argument. So that value will be displayed in the label widget that is associated with this object. So that's all of the code in the class. The only other thing that we have is this statement that creates an instance of the class, and that actually causes the GUI to be displayed on the screen. So let's go ahead and run this program so we can see the user interface. So here's the window, and you can see that it's blank. There's nothing displayed in the labels, but if I click the show info button, the data is displayed in the labels. And if we click the quit button, the program terminates.